when you look at people like Malcolm Gladwell, he wrote that book Blink years ago, and he talks about how there are people out there, experts in the field, that because they've got such a wide range of experience and skills, that they are in that position. Sometimes they just know. They can't explain why, but they're just in a snap judgment with all that years of experience working in a specific field. They know whether something's this or that. And Malcolm gives examples of forgeries within the art world, and he talks about these two guys that were experts in sculpture, of marble sculpture from like the Renaissance period, and they had this group that had spent thousands of pounds trying to take samples of this marble to work out whether it was a forgery. And this one guy walked in, and within 10 seconds he said, yeah, it's a fake. And he said, well, how the hell do you know that? And he couldn't put it into words at the time, and he said, I just know that it's a fake. And then it turns out it was, and they tried to analyze how he knew that it was. And I think that's kind of like with magic, the longer you spend in it, you are instinctively going to know what's going to work for an audience, work for you, and you can't shortcut those kind of things. It's things that you have to invest yourself in, and time, money, and sort of experience to get it. So it's really vital that we're not trying to shortcut your way to the top, because you're going to get found out at some point.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Desert Island Tricks. Another guest is waiting. He's actually on Zoom. Truth be told, I have known about today's guest since I was pretty young. In fact, I would say his DVD series through Alakazam, strangely, really introduced me to his ideas, and then I followed his career over the years. And I would say at one point, he was sort of the biggest corporate magician that I'd ever seen. So he was always posting these really amazing videos. His routines were clever. If you have the chance to check out Looch's DVD set, the routines on there are absolutely phenomenal. They stand the test of time. You can do all of them still, and they will absolutely fry people. He is an absolute legend in the world of mentalism, and someone that I've really wanted to get on here from day one. So I'm so thrilled to finally have him on here. I know this is going to be full of insight and full of really interesting choices. So I think that's enough of a build-up for the one and only Looch. Hello, Looch.
I think you've got the wrong person, mate. I was getting excited for this intro too. Who is it?
But it's true. All of the things that you brought out over the years, you've done your book test, which was absolutely phenomenal, so well thought out. And then you, of course, had your book series, which everyone went mad for. So you've literally just continued and done your own thing. And now, of course, you've got My Mind Rocks, which is a brilliant platform where you have so many incredible guests on there, and a lot of your tricks, like I always distinctly remember Nod to Pocket Watch, which was one that I remember on those early DVDs. I know that that's something that you still teach and you still perform.
Nod to Pocket Watch, yeah, it was one of the very first purely mentalism pieces that I'd sort of scripted and created. Not obviously the original idea, not mine. It's called Nod to Pocket Watch for a reason, because Bob Cassidy, the late great mentor, I miss that guy so much, but he had the pocket watch premonition in one of his books, and it was a nod to pocket watch. It was like a tribute to him, because I didn't use a pocket watch. I wanted to use a different type of receptacle and update the handling slightly to it's gone over various guises over the year, and currently how I do it uses business cards, but back then, in reference to the performance that I first released, which I think is the one that you're talking about, which would have been on the DVD and the book, used post-it notes at the time. I got into using post-it notes for mentalism. There was a time where they became quite popular. I don't know if you can remember Bev Bevy Bev down the Magic Cafe. That is Julian Bevmore, and he now created his own cold reading system, and he has a load of books himself. But he wrote something, Mentalism, what was just on Post-it notes. It was really popular mid-2000s, and that's probably where that idea of utilizing the Post-it notes into the routine came from, I think. But as time goes on, and I became more of a corporate worker, I wanted to be able to use that particular routine, but use my business cards and then leave them as a sort of networking thing and make sure they've got my contact details afterwards. So yeah, great routine. I do still do it. We covered it on My Mind Rocks, which was fun because I think it had been about 2 years since I performed it, and we captured the very first performance back, and it was so rusty, but we kept it in and then did a few more subsequently to sort of show the different kinds of ways you can present it, because as you know, but our audience might not, you're essentially predicting a choice, a freely chosen word or product or whatever it is, and you at the end show that you've got a folded billet, what's produced from somewhere, that shows that you've predicted that particular word. So yeah, great routine. I'm glad to be using it again in a way. I kind of let it slip a little bit. I don't know if that ever happens to you, whether you've done something that many times over the years and you just think you've got it locked in, but then you revisit it after a few months and you think, actually, I need to work on this again. It's no longer in that sort of toolkit ready to go at a moment's notice.
Well, I think what's interesting about you and those early years as well is I have always associated you with a parlour and stage performer. There wasn't really a time when I was thinking back, much like Mark Paul, Mark Spellman. I always think of your creations and the information that you put out there as being a corporate stand-up performer. So is your list, or will your list, reflect more of the stand-up parameters, or have you gone for some close-up ideas?
That's really interesting as well to hear that, because for me, I feel like I'm still making that transition over to stand-up. Sad Mentalism, when that came out through Alakazam, that was almost 20 years ago. I think 2006 that book came out. It was all close-up because that reflected the types of gigs that I was doing at the time, which would have been mix and mingle bookings for a couple of hours at a corporate party, a private party sometimes, maybe a handful a year, but the biggest market for me was weddings back then. I think I was averaging 45, 50 weddings a year, plus some of the corporate work in sort of 2010 onwards, that sort of time. The list I would say it'd be a well-balanced list, a well-rounded list that covers elements of close-up, elements of that sort of spontaneous go into something if someone ever requests to see something, as well as the more scripted, bigger pieces that you would probably do on a parlour or a stage.
Well, I think that's as much of a tease as we can give. So, if this is your first time listening to the podcast, the idea is that we're about to maroon Looch on his very own magical island. When he's there, he's allowed to take 8 tricks, banish 1 item, take 1 book and 1 non-magic item that he uses for magic. The particulars, like who's there, how big the island is, all of that good stuff, we do not mind because this island exists in Looch's own imagination. With that being said, let's head over to Looch's island and find out what he put in position number 1.
Well, in position number 1 is a potentially controversial one for mentalists, and it's a marked deck of playing cards. And I say controversial because I am bored to death of hearing people wax lyrical about whether we should use playing cards in mentalism. I think it comes down to a couple of really basic things. Do people associate a deck of cards with a magic trick? You're going to get 50% of the audience that say yes, 50% that don't. And it's going to be very difficult to shake either camp down. But for me, a marked deck of cards is just a natural, easy tool, and people are familiar with them. They don't feel that, what's this strange looking item that you've pulled out of your pocket that makes me think you're a bit of a weirdo. It's just a deck of cards. If some people think, oh, he's going to do a card trick, well, I'm hired there to entertain, so it doesn't offend me as a mentalist. So when I say a marked deck of cards, I can be a lot more specific, because I have used decks that have been marked over the years. Every different type I could imagine growing up, I tried. And for a long time, I was a huge fan of Boris Wilde's marked deck. I thought it was a wonderful, and it still is a wonderful deck. However, around 2010, I'm guessing it might be a little bit later, I was handed a deck of cards called the Great Whites. It was by a gentleman that you'll all be aware of, because now he designs and builds some of the most amazing packs of cards in the world. It's Phill Smith. And he gave me this deck, and he asked for some feedback, knowing that I did a lot of weddings. So I would go out, and I'm one of these people, Jamie, I don't know if you are, but if you have your set, your act, that your A material that you always perform, I don't like to deviate away. And introducing a new prop or a new gimmick or a new idea, even sometimes just introducing a new line, can be really difficult to try and get in there. And when he handed me the deck, I thought, my honest opinion was, well, I'm never going to use these. But I went out to a wedding, and I used this, and it was the first iteration of his optical marking system. I think that's what he calls it. And since then, you'll have all heard of these marked decks, because they've probably been one of the best-selling ones over the past 10 years. It was the DMC Elites, which has now transitioned into the Elysian Hewitt's deck. That's his latest iteration of it, which I think is nailed it perfect at this point. I don't think well, who knows? Maybe he will make improvements to it, but at this point, I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, what else can you do with it? It's as perfect as it's going to be. But going back to this wedding, and it was the first time I was using the Great Whites, I'd been using a routine called Body Language from the Black Project book, but it was also on a Penguin lecture, but it's as simple as it can be. And I remember reading the reviews on Penguin afterwards, where people saying, I've paid for this lecture and all he's done is revealed a card on a marked deck. And I thought those people completely missed the point. It was the presentation was designed to look as authentic and genuine as it could for reading poker tells. That's what it's designed to do, reading body language. And I'd been using this deck throughout the wedding to do this. And it was getting towards the end of the wedding, and the groom came over to me and he said to me, oh, do you mind doing something for just me and my partner? Because they'd been off doing the photos and being pulled here, there and everywhere. And they just found themselves in this room with me for a few minutes, and they just wanted 5 minutes. And they said, my friends have been telling me about that. You can read their poker tells. Can you do something like that? Because I'm really into poker. And I said, yeah, of course. And I offered the cards out, and I usually offer them in like a sort of a dribble, and they just say stop, and they take the card. He'd taken in that moment, and I read the marking, it was the Queen of Hearts, and his bride was next to him, and she said, oh, can I do it as well? So I thought, yeah, we'll do 2 for 1. So I sort of turned and I did the exact same selection choice for her. And the marking that I saw that she took was the King of Hearts. So he's got the Queen of Hearts, she's got the King. And I thought to myself, in that moment, there's no point me going into this body language presentation at all. I thought, I'm just going to do something on the fly, and I'm so glad that I did. I said, make sure that they don't, each of you don't see the other cards. And I said, turn and face each other. And I said, earlier on, you exchanged vows, you exchanged rings, and you exchanged promises to be life partners. I said, now we're going to exchange cards, because it would make more sense for him to be the King of Hearts and she to be the Queen of Hearts on the wedding day. So they exchanged cards. It was a natural thing because they exchanged vows. It made sense to me in my head at the moment. And I turned to the groom and I said, today of all days where, you're coming together, a celebration of your love, and she's picked out a card for you. And in a way, it's kind of a gift of how she sees you, how it sort of represents in your life. Can you have a look at what card? And then we'll look at maybe analysing the card and explaining what it means a little bit. And he turns around and he sees the King of Hearts. And I remember his face just sort of lit up. And her face lit up as well, because she'd not seen the card neither. They just exchanged it. And then I turned to her and they could almost not wait. And you could see that excitement. And I said, it'd be interesting to see how he sees you on this day, and turns it over. It's the Queen of Hearts. And I remember the reaction was they just hugged, you know what I mean? But she turned to me and she had tears, and he kind of was all red faced and that, and they just gave me a big hug. And I thought it was one of the nicest, most genuine reactions I could have got in that moment. And since then, I was just sold on that particular marking system, because I could see them from so far away at an arm's length, or, you know, even if a card was taken at a table and I was stood 6 to 8 feet away, I'm pretty confident that I could see the markings from there as well. So yes, my first item would be the Elysian Duets marked playing cards.
Well, I think in that one story, you've summed up why marked deck of cards is acceptable, because we tend to think of it as a tool for the trick and like either revealing a card or something like that. But it's the fact that you were clued up on what the card was that allowed that to happen. So the marking in terms of the presentation never came into it. But had you not have had that marked deck there, you would never have known that those were selected, and that moment wouldn't have surfaced the way that it did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even if I'm saying that that's going to be the first item that I'm going to take, do I still have to specify to you an effect that I would use with that marked deck?
You did mention your poker mind reading thing.
Yeah, I don't think it would be the go-to though these days, as I've developed. Back then, yes, it was a really good contextual trick that would set the scene as what I was as a mentalist, of being able to read tells. It was that kind of early on thing. But over the years, my go-to routine now with any kind of deck like this, and it doesn't even need to be an actual deck of cards. You can do this really with any packet of something, whether that's game show cards or postcards or photographs, anything that's marked, you can do the same routine with it. And it's probably the most performed piece with a deck of cards that I do, and it's a routine called the dealer. So the dealer is a routine where I don't touch the cards. So if me and you were doing this, Jamie, you would be shuffling the cards, you'd be handling them and mixing them up. And I would ask you to name a playing card as you were mixing them up. And at some point you would name the card, you'd table the cards face down, and I would ask you, do you know where that card is in the deck? And everyone says, naturally, no. And I hit them with this line. I always say, actually, you do. You do know where it is in the deck. You know exactly where it is. You're just not really aware of how you know. And let me sort of explain this. And I pick up the deck, keeping it face down, and I start to deal the cards. It's called the dealer because I'm dealing cards face down. And I just say, have you ever walked down the street before you get a sense that someone's maybe following you or looking at you from a distance, and it's that kind of uneasy feeling that you can't describe or put it into words? 99% of people at this point will say yes. And I'll say, it's usually our instinct, our intuition. But if I say this, and say this to a man, and I say the word intuition, their eyes tend to roll. So I change the word, and if I say, do you trust your gut? Do you trust your instincts? In business, you get a bad feeling, you can't explain it, but you know to be cautious. And most men at that point can kind of relate to that. But we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about intuition, of gut feeling, and instinctive thought. And I say, you just know, just trust your instincts. So as I'm going through the deck now, whenever you feel I'm getting close to the card, just say stop. And they say stop. The remainder of the deck's dismissed. We scoop up that pile. And I said, you say stop around here. So I'm going to deal them face down again. And you tell me when you feel that feeling is just starting to fade a little bit. And they say stop. And I dismiss the remaining cards in my hand. So the most instinctive portion of that deck, where they felt that there was something, remains on the table. And at this point, there's usually about 10 cards or so. And again, I'll deal them out. They say stop. We eliminate it. We're down to about 5 cards. And it's an elimination process that they're 100% in control of. But we get down to maybe 2 cards. They then have to eliminate one and focus on one of those cards. At the end of the routine, we've eliminated 51 from a full deck down to just one card, all being done based off their instincts, and all the cards are being face down. It's from a shuffled deck, and it was a freely named card, yet the only card left on the table is the one that they named, and they've not seen it, not been keeping track of it throughout. And when I started to do this, I actually first did it at an event called Mind Summit in Cologne in Germany, and this would have been about 2016. I was sat in the foyer to the hotel, and we were surrounded by other mentalists from various countries in Europe. And somebody had handed me a mark deck, and it was a DMC deck. And they said, do something with this. Looch, do you mind? And I'm usually not the kind of person that people gather around and I do things at conventions, but I did, and I did the dealer. Everyone in that room knew it was a marked deck, yet it still fooled them. Because what I was essentially doing is that they didn't realize that I'd spent so long with that marked deck over the years that I could read them in an instant from about 10 feet away. And because I could do that, I got really, really good at dealing cards down, looking for the card, and then using certain, let's say, mentalists' techniques to control outcomes to ensure that card's the last one down, and it never ever fails to absolutely blow people away. It's one of those routines that I'm very proud of, and it absolutely would be the first choice when I'm using a marked deck of cards.
Well, that sounds like a great choice, and your mark deck is going along with you. And it does lead us to number 2. So what did you put in your second spot?
The second spot is it's more of a tool for me, and that is Craig Filicetti, when he came out with his company Pro Mystic years ago. One of his first kind of pro line products was a product called Real Die. And I know a lot of people now know of Real Die because of things like Enverdi Die and the more, I don't want to say mainstream, but the more commercially available dice that are used by magicians and mentalists to know what numbers are on a dice without, let's say, seeing it. I think I can get away with saying that. And the Real Die for me is a prop that I use. I always have it in my pocket if I'm either at a networking event or a close-up gig. And I would say that one prop has generated me more bookings than any other physical prop that I've had ever. And because it's so small, so convenient, and it's literally ready to go in a moment's notice, that would be my second choice. And I think between those two first choices, that would make up a good 50% of my kind of close-up repertoire, if that makes sense, because it's just two tools that I can use in a multitude of different ways, I think. And I think that's an important point to say with mentalism. It's more about the tools than the props, I think. That kind of makes sense.
Yep, I think that's a great choice, and it's one that we've spoken about before on the podcast. I myself use the MD Mini from Pro Mystic, very much the same sort of idea or concept, just with a different prop. My question to you then is, if we could cement only one routine with your Real Die, would it A, be a close-up routine, a parlour routine, and B, what would that routine be?
It's a great question. And about a year ago, one of the things that I did is I taught them my routine on My Mind Rocks. And it generated a discussion by the members at the time as to how many possible ideas can we use from this single prop. And we ended up doing a deep dive kind of investigation on it, where we brought members on and to provide as many different brainstorming ideas as to what type of routines you can use. And really, for this kind of prop, it's infinite. But to answer your question, I am very boring when it comes to changing things up. So I would use my opener, my dice opener that I've used in every single close-up set that I've done in the past 20 years. Well, no, it can't be 20. When did it come out? At least 15. I remember mine is still going and it's an absolute workhorse. It has never let me down, and it's why I would always recommend the Pro Mystic one. Not to sort of shoot down any others, but my experience with the Pro Mystic one is it's never let me down, so I've never had to use any of the others. It's not to say that I don't own them. I have tried others out, but the real die is the one I always come back to. So the routine would be my opening gambit, which is literally choose a number. Give me a number between 1 and 6. And when I say that, I found that the vast majority of reasons this is no exposure of a method, but the vast majority of people, when I say that, they choose the number 4. And I don't know why. It's just what I've kind of learnt over the experience of asking that question. So often I will have the dice on the table with the number 4 uppermost, but not make any reference to it. I might just ask them the question as I place it down, but keeping eye contact as we do. And they'll say 4. And I'll say, look down. See, the mind reading's already begun. And at that point, it's a really great just segue into that routine, because people go, what? So at that point, I'll say, we'll do this a few times, but the idea is that you try and keep that number from me. And my goal in this is to sort of read you and try to work out what number you've gone, but then also try to predict what you'll go with next. And we'll do this 3 times in a row. And then depending on what number they go with, I have a different way of revealing it each time. And essentially, because there are 1 in 6 numbers, there's 6 potential outcomes that I'm dealing with in terms of my script. So Joshua Quinn did a really interesting book years ago, and I want to call it Duplicity. I can't remember if that's the exact name or not, Duplicity. And it was an exploration into drawing duplications, but scripting to look like you've influenced the choice of drawing, like what they've drawn. If you then examine the script that was used in the build-up to that, people can pick out a few references where you've created the impression that you've influenced their choice of drawing, let's say. And that was where my head was with this routine. I wanted to be able to create outs, let's say, that would look to the audience that he's made him pick that number. There was a couple that I used to use on a regular basis, and they were really, really fun, and they would hit more often than not. And when they did hit, you always knew that you were going to get a great reaction. And one of them was just, I'd say, think of another number. You're going to change the dice a few times if you want to, but settle on one number, cover it up so I can't see it. I'll turn away. Just let me know when you've got 1. And I would say that when I knew that they'd chosen the number 1. And that's sort of obvious, that overtly stating, just let me know when you've got 1, should have gone under the radar and made you choose the number 1 without you being aware of it. What number did you go for? They lift it up, it's a 1, everybody would react. And it was a really nice moment. And it made me start thinking, well, what else can I look at? And that's where I would get, because I've exposed to the audience what I've just said. What was the last thing that I said as I turned away? And just let me know when you've got 1. Obviously, that's gone under the radar. It's made you choose the number 1, correct? Yes, reaction. But now they know that. And so I will use that as an additional tool. I'll say, but now you'll be listening. You'll be listening to every word that I say to try and decipher, am I trying to suggest a certain number to you this time? So bear in mind, this time it is a free choice. Not a 3 choice, but it is a free choice. And then that would get another laugh, because I'm being playful with what I'm sort of presenting at this point. And then it also gave me an additional attempt afterwards where I could say, look, this time I'm not going to say anything at all. I'll say nothing. Just change the dice to whatever number you want and let me know when you've got that number. Because they're listening for me to say 1 again and things like that. So I had so much fun developing little bits of script for that it's one of my absolute favourite go-to routines. And it'd be probably the only thing I would do with it, really.
And that would translate just as easily to close-up and stage as well, which I think is great.
Do you know what? I have used it in stage and parlor, and I do continue to use it. And I worried for far too long that the prop was that tiny, no one can see it. Do you need to verify? Well, maybe, and there's times in my stage where I've used cameras and a big screen so people can see it. I have a little dice cup on a little green base table. It looks very nice, but it's not really needed. because they go off the audio, they go off the participant's reaction, and they know whether it's right or wrong. But having said that, I did overthink this for a long time. And talking to my friend La Hookway, if you don't know La, he's an absolute genius. I call him the fixer because I often come to him with a routine and he'll just fix it. He's got an uncanny ability to turn anything into gold. He's a really creative thinker. And me and Laura were trying to come up with a way that we could introduce the die to our stand-up shows. And we were talking about the big foam dice. There's like a 20-inch foam dice you can get from Amazon for about £10. And I bought one of these and I thought, right, how am I going to get this and insert it in? Because I wanted to hide it in there. So I called out the number one, and when I sort of pulled it out, it was a long tube, which then I cut to the same size. I cut a piece of that tube off that was the same size as the dice, which would leave a chamber inside this foam dice now that would perfectly match the dice that's going in there. So I'd pull that out, I'd put the dice in, making sure the orientations are correct, so it's the same as the one, and I would push this back in, and you've got a giant foam dice that does the exact same thing. It works great, but you have to travel with it. So it wasn't good for when I had a lot of stuff in London where I would typically take the train down. I didn't want to be walking with this giant 20-inch or 25-inch foam dice. So it ended up going to the back burner, but I can recommend doing that if you want to introduce that type of routine into your stage act for sure.
Well, that's a great second choice, and I love the idea of the routine as well. It sounds like it's a very well thought through and considered routine, when most people would ordinarily just hand this out, say, think of a number, and then reveal it. So, yeah, that sounds absolutely phenomenal. And it leads us to number 3. So what did you put in your third spot?
My third one was, I moved away from the idea of taking tools with me, because I know mentalism for me is essentially a metaphorical toolbox that you have of skills. But this is a routine that I think has its origins with Animan. And then Bob Cassidy, who I will mention probably quite a lot on this podcast, he was somewhat of a mentor to me, and I do look up to him in his work. He spent the best part of his career developing this routine, and now it's fair to say that it is a classic of mentalism, and it's the fourth dimensional telepathy, or sometimes known as the 3-envelope test, depending on where you learnt about it. But essentially, and I'm sure it's been covered before, but I was a little bit in two minds whether to include it or not. But to be truthful, it's a routine that I think is a perfect mini show in one. You know, it's got a start, a middle, and end. It gets progressively more and more impossible. And there's just no explanation for it from a lay audience if it's well structured the way that Bob created it. So yeah, fourth dimensional telepathy. I would probably... And it's kind of plugging my own stuff, but I released a version of that through Read My Mind, and I called it Propelopes. And I think for a desert island where I'm going to be performing this, the Propelopes might be the better choice because they're made from plastic. They're essentially polypropylene pockets that mimic the job of what the envelopes did in Bob's routine. And then I could get it wet, and it wouldn't matter because I could just reuse them again and again, and I don't have an infinite supply of the number 3 coin envelopes that mentalists love to use all over the world. So I would probably take my version, which is the Propelopes version, just because I can reuse them over and over again, and they're going to be a durable solution when I'm sat on the beach, I think.
Yeah, I think that's great. Now, which version of fourth dimensional telepathy? Because I know that you mentioned yours there, but I know Mark Paul has quite a lot of work on this. Obviously, you've got Bob Cassidy had several versions of it, I believe, during his career. Yeah. So which version would you go for?
I would go for the version that I call School Days. Obviously, a lot of people who know my work know that I used to be a teacher. And the routine that I've used for a good 20 years has been based around that aspect of my life. So it is a fusion of Bob's ideas in terms of the structure, in terms of the I'm sure I can say this, the numbering of the envelopes, if that makes sense. So it retains that structure, even though we don't number the envelopes. They just sit on a little stand, and it's a stand that's numbered. But I would use that version because of the setup doesn't rely on sort of folded billets. It uses flat cards. So it goes into another card that I'm able to get the information. I'm just being a little bit cautious how I do that. At a later time, when that envelope is dismissed, it's in my case. And when I go back to grab my marker pen, that's when I would use that opportunity to be able to continue being in that position where I can reveal the information. So I would use the school days one, which I think I taught on my second Penguin lecture. Yeah, I think it's the one from 2015. I did a lecture there, and that's where it went in. If not, it's the live act. I can't remember. It's showing my age now, but I go into it in deep detail and how to construct the envelopes and the structure of everything. I've kind of... There was problems and areas from fourth dimensional telepathy as they were written down previously through Bob's work that Bob overcome with experience and practice and his impeccable timing of being able to get away with it through humor. I couldn't. So I wanted to eliminate the folded billet. The reason why is I wanted to, as everyone knows, that first book that I released was sad, simple and direct mentalism. I like to make sure everything's as simple as can be. So there's very little to go wrong, and it's very easy to understand from an audience's point of view. So that would be the specific version that I would present, I think. Yes.
Okay, so you're going to take school days with you. So far, we've gone from a marked deck, real die, and fourth dimensional telepathy. Just those three tricks alone are really heavy hitters in terms of a set.
Do you know, in all fairness, I'd probably be happy just taking those three. Do you know what I mean? It really would, because I don't think you need to collect as many methods and tricks as you need really to have a successful act. And I think that's the difference between a lot of people that have it as a hobby. You know, you buy in, you're looking for adding new content and new tricks all the time, as opposed to learning techniques and seeing what you can do with them. That sort of creation aspect of it. And I think in mentalism, you could limit yourself to just sort of 5 effects, really. And you'd be able to build a successful career out of those with the iterations and variations that you would at some point come up with by spending time and experience with them. It's a natural progression. We talked about the dealer earlier on with the marked deck. I'm still coming up with different lines and different variations of that now after all these years, and it's still being fine-tuned. And I think it constantly will be until the day that I leave this earth. And that's part of, being a mentalist. I think we're forever students of the art as opposed to masters. I think if you're open to change and you're open to improvement, you have to just make those fine incremental enhancements when you can.
Well, I think that leads us nicely into number 4. So what did you put in your 4th spot?
Right. So this one is, it's a strange one because it's not mine. It's something that I've looked up to for years. I think it's an absolute fantastic idea and structure. And it's the one thing that I think is so different to traditional mentalism in that, think of something, I'll tell you what it is. And the routine is called The Ritual by Bruce Bernstein. Now, Bruce put this book, I think he originally released it as a manuscript, and then it was included in his Unreal book, which if you don't have, and I'm not talking to you, Jamie, because I'm 99.9% certain you've got it. If the people listening have never got this book, Unreal by Bruce Bernstein, I would absolutely recommend that you get it because it's a goldmine of incredible thinking. And Bruce included this routine. It was called The Ritual. And it's a really underexplored area of mentalism where he actually asks his participant to think of something that is holding them back in life. It could be stress, it could be anxiety, worry about something, financial issues, whatever it is, something that's holding them back. It might even be confidence. And they are to focus on that word, to write it down, and it becomes a billet routine. And the interesting thing about it is it's not just a race to reveal what it is, because what would be the point of that? You know, bring someone up, focus on something that they feel holds them back, and then tell them what it is, and then go back to your seat. You know, what would it would just be so bad. So he uses it as as a metaphor to illustrate how a thought can manifest itself into a physical action. And he has them, or the participant, hold out their arm. And he says, just resist. I'm just going to apply a little bit of pressure onto the back of your wrist. And I just want you to try and resist it. And he does this, and the participant is able to resist it. But the billet, what's just been written down with the thing that is holding them back, is off on the table. It might be in a wine glass, 6 feet away. And he then picks up the billet and he brings it closer to the person. And as he brings it closer, he tests their ability to restrain, is pushed down again. And as it becomes closer, their weakness, they become weak and they can't hold their hand up anymore and resist the pressure. It moves it away again and they become stronger again. And whenever it gets closer, they get weaker. It's a really eerie, but visually incredible thing to watch from an audience's point of view, because we hear that mentalism is not a visual thing. So this particular routine creates interest for people peripherally who might be looking and think, what on earth's going on there? And then the routine has a few more phases in it, but essentially he then discards or destroys this piece of paper that is supposed to hold this person back. In doing so, he learns the thing and then uses it to sort of feedback, give us a slight reading, and kind of boosts their confidence, if that makes sense. And at that point, the final thing after he does the reveal is to test their arm, and they're now strong again. So it's become kind of full circle, that in a way it's kind of eliminated and got rid of that stress, that fear, that anxiety in the person, and that the participant comes away feeling positive and kind of mentally refreshed. So that would be the routine. Even though I don't have a lot of experience with it, I have enough fascination and respect for it that I would, if I was going to be sat on a desert island, I could commit a lot of mental thought to it and do something what's more me. But that would be definitely a routine that I would like to take and explore further.
Well, I like the idea of a visual piece of mentalism, because in these lists, we haven't, certainly in terms of the mentalism heavy lists, no one, to my knowledge or to my recollection, has focused on a visual piece of mentalism, something that can be presented for the audience at large as well as that individual. So is this something that you wish that you could sort of develop and make your own version of it, or is it just a case of creating a different subtext for it that is more you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I might have ideas of where I want it to go, but then I've been around long enough to know that those ideas are organic and are fluid and will change with time and experience. So I think I would be looking to fine tune it and personalize it as a structure as it is, because who am I to question Bruce's structure? This is something that he's invested a lot of time and experience in. So I would use that as a loose structure to base it around, and then see what else comes with experimentation. I seem to remember Timon Kraus also did something with this idea much more recently, I think within the last few years. And I had the pleasure of being in a workshop in Hamburg with Jan Becker a good few years ago. And he asked for a volunteer. I didn't know what he was going to do at the time, but it turned out that I was the participant in his version of the ritual, which had a really nice moment in it, which I don't want to spoil because it's Jan's. But there are people out there that are using this. It's just not one of those, it's not, the popular item of the moment. It's not this month, this is what everyone's working on. It's just been one of those that sat in the background for years. Certain people have found it and done things with it, but it's largely overlooked or missed, I think, in people's research.
Well, I think it's one that everyone's going to be researching now. So that's good, because it means that hopefully we'll get a big plethora of those sorts of routines, which I'm a big fan of. But it does lead us to number 5. So what did you put in your 5th spot?
The 5th one is another routine by another mentalist. This one, unfortunately, sadly no longer with us. An incredibly beautiful man by the name of Barry Richardson. I don't know if you ever had the chance to meet Barry. One of my most fondest memories in mentalism really is meeting Barry at the University of Huddersfield years ago. There was a society called the British Society of Mystery Entertainers, the BSME, and they used to have annual events and masterclasses or workshop days on mentalism with various guests. And I had been brought in with a few other people to do a lecture that day, and in the audience was Barry Richardson. Completely blew my mind. Did not expect him to be in there. One is he's an American guy. He was in his 70s at the time, I think, and he was such a gentle and warm and just lovable person, radiated positivity and just encouragement. And I remember he took me to one side during the lecture that I gave. I actually referenced a move that he talked about in one of his Theatre of the Minds book, but instead of it being used as a switch, I'd used it as a peak. And when he heard that, I remember just hearing this one person clapping. And I remember looking up, and it was in the University Hall, and it had raked seating. And all I could see was Barry Richardson stood there on his own, giving me a standing ovation. And no one else was like, what's he doing? What's Barry doing? And he just said to me, he said it was just a really, really nice idea developed from this that he'd never heard about in all the years. And he gave me so much encouragement. And he was just such a great, great guy. And he was encouraged to perform something. So he ended up doing somewhat of a mini lecture there. And in it, he did a routine called Quartet. I think, for references, he released it separately. In fact, he did, because I'm sure I bought it from Alakazam back in the day. It was just almost like 5 pages of A4 printed out, folded over, stapled, and it came with a little thing and a deck of cards, and it was just this little package. But it's also in his Theatre of the Mind book. So it's called Quartet, and it's Barry Richardson's memorized deck routine, which sounds, I haven't done it justice, but watching him do it, it was incredible. And it got faster and stronger and more impossible, where I'm sat there completely scratching my head, having no idea how he's doing it. You know, the cards were utterly and thoroughly mixed up by everyone. They were handed out in such a seemingly random way, but he just knew every single card. He knew where they all were. So it wasn't really a memorized deck routine that he was doing. He could kind of identify who had what cards, but in a way that felt like he was dancing. And he was just in a complete flow in this routine. It was perfect. One of the best mentalism routines I've seen with my own eyes, like being in the same room. And at that point, I knew that it was something that I wanted to learn. So I spent some time with it. I spent a lot of time with it, really. And I used it at weddings when I did I don't want to say after dinner shows, but after the speeches and the wedding breakfast. Sometimes I would stand and present, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes to the whole group. And it would be a great, great routine to use that would build speed, build that impossible moment where the audience were just scratching their heads and laughing, because it got to the point where there's no way that he knows this quick. So they just tend to burst out laughing, really, because it's that absurd. And it did give this scope in the routine, which is really, really nice, to do this with other things as well. And I spent a good amount of time trying to create a different thematic presentation that used the exact same method. So all I was doing is, instead of using playing cards, I'd use alphabet cards, and I was revealing letters. And at the end, there was a group of letters that hadn't been revealed, and I brought them in, and I would reveal them one at a time, and they would go on a stand. And the person helping me place these letter cards on the stand was the best man, typically the groom's brother or his best friend. And I found that the best man never got any real credit at the wedding. It was never, it was the unsung hero. So this was my opportunity to put the shine and the spotlight on the best man, because those last letters that I was struggling with, basically when I revealed them on this stand and they turned it around, it spelt the name best man, or the word best man. So there was an element of customization that you could do with a routine as well, which just gives it complete brownie points from me for any type of routine that you don't have to stick 100% to, and you can go off and customize and create your own versions of. So yes, Quartet by Barry Richardson.
Now, you mentioned that you use this in weddings, but is this something you also used to do in your stand-up performances in your shows? Because I feel like that would, and we've spoken about memorized decks sort of routines in the past, and how it's normally used as a way to credify your abilities. However, this is sort of a, like you mentioned, they start laughing because they realize that it's absurd that you could possibly be able to do this. So it sort of doesn't fit into that same category. So did you use it stand up, and where in your set would you tend to use it?
Yeah, it's only ever really been used stand-up. So when I talk about the weddings, it would be like a stand-up performance at the wedding in front of the whole room, typically after the wedding breakfast, or it would be after the speeches. I would be the last person introduced before essentially they would turn the room around for the evening. So I would have, 30, 45 minutes, something like that. And it would come probably about halfway, because I use it as a transitional routine where I could talk about, it was not heavy mind reading, it was more to do with memory. And I talked about learning, having a memory-based skills, learning mnemonics. And one of the questions I ask is, put your hand up if you've ever been to Vegas. And you would typically get half the room what will put their hands up, and I'd say, have any of you heard of a guy called Massey Gambit? And sometimes you have a few hands raised, which is great because Massey Gambit doesn't exist. He's just a character I've created over the years. But Massey Gambit was a croupier at Vegas in the 80s, and he worked at Bally's Casino. And one of the things that he could do is take a deck of cards. He could actually do it with 4 decks of cards, but he would take a deck of cards, hand it out to be shuffled, and he'd look through all those 4 decks that have been shuffled together and go through once and learn the entire sequence of those 4 decks. And I'd say now these days it's almost impossible because they use like computerized shuffling with 6 decks in a shoe. But back then, Massey was really good at sort of doing this croupier kind of demonstration of being able to recall all these cards, completely made up, but it sounded like I knew what I was talking about. And sometimes people would put their hand up and say, "Oh yeah, I think I've heard of that name." But yeah, completely made up. And it would be my way in to talk about mnemonics and memory. And as part of being a mentalist, some of it relies on these kind of techniques. And I would love to share this with you and give you a demonstration and get people on board that way. So it was kind of like a break in that idea of what mentalism is. We start off, we talk about reading people, reading thoughts and reading body language. But then I wanted to introduce a different facet, a different angle of what mentalism could be for some people, and talked about that developing of the mind and the memory techniques and things like that. So that's where it would fit in the program. And it would be very much a segue routine into something later on.
Hey guys, Harry here from Alakazam Magic. I hope you're enjoying the podcast. I'm just here to interrupt and tell you a little bit about the Alakazam Magic Convention. It has taken us 35 years to get to this date. However, May the 9th, 2026 will be the very first Alakazam Magic Convention. Now, I know you guys are super excited, maybe just as excited as we are. First of all, the venue is a 37-minute direct train from central London. The venue is then literally a 10-minute walk from the train station. There's hotels within a stone's throw, there's restaurants nearby, and there's incredible food and drink on site. That's all without even getting into the magic side of things. We are going to have 4 incredible lecturers performing throughout the day, including one person who's going to be flying over to do their very first UK lecture. We are buzzing to announce who those 4 are. Not only that, there'll be dealers on site and a place for you guys to jam and session and meet new friends. Where are the lectures going to be held? This is my personal favourite bit about the Alakazam convention. They're going to be happening in one of the cinema screens. That means fully tiered seating, comfy seats, a drinks holder, and there will be a close-up camera on the jumbo cinema screen that will be giving you close-ups of all the little nuances that you're going to need to see when the lecturers are performing. There will of course be a full gala show to end the evening off. You guys are not going to want to miss it. The great thing is as well, on the Sunday, the day after, Alakazam Magic Shop, which is a 2-minute drive, will be open. So if you're heading down to the convention, why not stay overnight and come and visit our magic shop? Remember, May the 9th, 2026. Tickets on sale now at alakazam.co.uk. See you guys soon.
And another card trick. Controversially, there you go. Controversially. But it leads us to number 6. So where do we go with the 6th spot?
The 6 is one of mine routines. It's a hybrid, really, and it is probably the first. It's the first stand-up routine that I ever worked on. And over the years, the method has changed dramatically in that I used to use a gimmicked prop that I'd bought, and it relied on electronics. And over the years, it failed in various ways, the most unfortunate of times. And it got to the point where I wanted a manual, mechanical version of this. And it's a routine that is a hybrid of 2 different classics. One of them is Sneak Thief by Larry Becker, or Desire, Max Maven. It's kind of those 2 that created that as a classic. And it's also a fusion of like a chair test in a way, even though sometimes I perform it where I have them stood in a row, hence the name line up, as opposed to them being sat in a row. But the beauty of it is that you can do it standing or seated. It's up to them. So the routine is called the line up by me. And to describe it, 4 people come up on stage. They take a pen. I've got some different coloured marker pens. They take a pen in secret and put it in their pocket so no one knows what colour they've got. They take an envelope, and then I ask them a couple of questions. And I'm doing this while I'm not looking at them. So they're doing all this behind me, and the audience is kind of like confirming that this is what's going on. Have they got a pen? Great. Is it hidden? You don't know what color they've got? Great. Okay. So just answer instinctively. Don't think too much about it. And then I would ask them a 50-50. So it would be something like the Rolling Stones or the Beatles. And they give me their answer. Bert or Ernie? Do you prefer Chinese food or Indian food? Would you prefer to jump into the swimming pool or to go for a swim in the ocean? Those kind of 50-50 questions, I would ask them a few of them, and their response would seemingly give me an indication of what colour I think they've selected, what envelope they've got. And then I would have them stand in a position, and I've got these numbered discs on the floor, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I say, you sound like you're going to be a number 2 person. Can you go and stand behind number 2? And you could get some inappropriate jokes off little things like that. And I would repeat this 4 times. So I'd have 4 people come up. They've all got an envelope. They've all got a different coloured marker pen, and they're now all stood in a position that I've positioned them in based on their responses to the questions. Obviously, the truth is the questions don't really give you any indication at all, but it helps create the idea that they do. And I think that's very important for an audience to sort of latch on to, that it's those answers that have given him the insight that he needs. And I think that's really important. At this point, I've got this flexibility in the routine where if I want, I can have all 4 people to provide, like, do a drawing on the back of the envelope with the pen that they've taken, make it nice and big and visual. And you can do a sneak thief type routine at that point where you can, you have the envelopes mixed up afterwards with the drawings on, and then you look at the drawings one at a time and you can discern who's done which drawing. But instead of doing drawings, sometimes, for example, if you do a drawing duplication in your act and you want to sort of break that kind of pattern up of doing the same things, I've had a lot of success with things like write down a word that you find funny. And I thought it was just one of those things that I used one day, and it completely changed the dynamic of the routine. The audience seemed really engaged with these words, because often it'll be a word that might be, when you walk in and say, oh, it's a private joke kind of thing, with companies, they have their own kind of in words and in jokes and in stories and things like that. And that would tend to get, it'd appear or it'd crop up in some of the performances. And you'd hear people laughing their heads off in the audience when we've looked at the word Cupid, for example. And I'm thinking, why is that so funny? But to them, it is because it makes sense. And then you would get them to explain it. And all of a sudden, it just increases the rapport and the connection. It just makes things gel and go a little bit better. So by having that flexibility to change what you want that is put on those envelopes, either a drawing, a word, or a number, or it could be a memory, or anything you want, it gives you a really nice amount of opportunities to create something what's more for you, really, as a performer. You get to choose what it is. It's not dictated to you. So you would invariably reveal and work out who's written what funny word or who's done what drawing. And in the end, they're stood holding these envelopes that have a drawing or a word on them, and they're in a certain order. And then we look at the order from a color point of view. So the order might be red, black, green, blue. That might be the final sequence of it. And it usually is, for mine, red, black, green, blue. And then I say, but why? And the audience never can provide an answer. And I say, why this exact order? And I'll tell you why, because this was the order that I decided before I came here today that you would stand in at the end, but typically no one believes me. So if you open up the envelope, you'll see that there's a piece of coloured card in there. And we're looking, just take it out, and we're looking for red, black, green, blue. And naturally, they've got this envelope with their drawing on in that colour. They pull out the card colour, and it matches the colour of the drawing, which becomes an applause cue, and they think that the routine's over. But then you've got it's kind of my idea of, when you look at David Berglass and he creates these incredibly elaborate stage pieces what have more and more reveals, and we've seen Darren use those fantastically over the years with, the ending to Enigma and things like this, where he just builds it, and you think, God, how many more applause cues can you get out of this one routine? You've squeezed blood out of a stone, and it's great as a technical exercise to look at how many you can do. And the lineup kind of sort of borrowed from that thinking, really. So then you've got other additional things that you can do. For example, if they pick up the numbered discs, on the back of those are colours, and they match the colours that they've got. So it was inevitable that they were going to be in that order. But my favourite part about it is that there was also a folded sheet of paper in those envelopes, and you can put whatever you want in there. And this is why it's my favourite. In terms of, if you're doing a corporate or a wedding or a birthday, you can customize what's inside those envelopes. So when the participants take out the contents and open it up, it will reveal a 100% customizable message for the client, or if it's the birthday girl or a wedding, it might say, congratulations, Steve and Sue. And it'll be in the exact same colors to match the color order that they're in as well. So it's an additional thing. And that routine, as I must have performed it hundreds and hundreds of times over the years, and it's just that staple routine. I know I'm going to get some really strong reactions from it. It's 100% customizable to the client, and it's a nice visual thing with 4 people stood on stage with a hybrid of 2 different classics in Mentalism. So, what else do you need, really? This is absolute routine that I would definitely use on my desert island, the lineup.
Yeah, I think this is a phenomenal trick, and I'm not sure if it was something that you sort of developed, but I distinctly remember seeing the pen selection portion of that routine on an early, I want to say it's probably Penguin Live, because I actually have a set that I made after watching it, because I thought it was so ingenious. And then I saw that you'd brought out the lineup, which felt like a more considered, more sort of put together version of that. And I remember seeing it and thinking, well, number one, the props look absolutely phenomenal. Like, the production quality on it, like I mentioned at the head of the podcast, your stuff is, I've got frameworks as well, phenomenal. Like, the quality of the product is just amazing. So not only does it look super, super professional, fill an entire stage, it's essentially a stand-up chair test, so you don't have to worry about getting the chairs. But like you just said, this can pack into a bag and go with you anywhere, to any situation, cruise ships, corporates, weddings, literally anywhere that you want to go. So I think it's an absolutely phenomenal trick, and it really is one that people should check out.
Do you know, it's funny you should say this, because those pens, you said that you bought a pack of those pens. I was for ages searching for some kind of pen box that achieved what that did, and finding those Stedler, what is that? I don't even know if that's how you pronounce it. Stedler, the German brand of pens that, the Germans always over-engineer everything, and they over-engineered that box to be just a fantastic box that does all the work for you. And yeah, I mean, the idea behind that actually came from what was he called? Or what is he called? I'm trying to the names. I want to say Stephen Tucker. That was it. Stephen Tucker. Visa Cabaret, the original, when it had its own wallet. That's where that idea come from. I probably really down to Pete and Mark's popularization of that with the Stealth Assassin wallet. They had a version of that, and I think that kind of cued everybody into that, because I'd not heard of the Tucker method before that, which would then sort of force me to go in down the rabbit hole, so to speak. So yeah, the Stephen Tucker idea inspired that, but the electric version was using like color match for years. But I'd invariably have problems with that particular product, whether it be range or inconsistency. But I knew I had to change it and make it more hands-on. So the offset is that you lose the aspect of it being really clean, in that you're nowhere near the selection of the pens, to now it being more of an important part of it. When the people say if you put emphasis on a prop, it becomes obvious. Well, sometimes if you put emphasis on a procedure or an element of a routine, it becomes more important than it actually really is. So when people remember it, they think, well, it was about the questioning. And I always ask those 50-50 questions, but really it was to cover up the fact that I was holding the pens as they got took. So yeah, the Stedler pack of pens, you can still get them to this day. They're about $5 from Amazon, W.H. Smith's. I can't remember. Was it one of the Penguin things that we talked about where you learned that? The lineup Pro kit, which is the thing that you reference afterwards, is I used to get frustrated that the thickness of the line on those pens were not visible from sort of 10, 15 feet away. They were visible that you could see the drawings or the writing that's being done on the envelope, but where it came a problem is that in certain environments, you couldn't differentiate the green from the blue ink or the black ink. The red was the one that you could always see. So I wanted to have really thick pens, marker pens. And that sent me down a rabbit hole that, Christ, I still get angry about it to this day, because the company who provide these pens were just diabolical in their dealings with me. But they didn't want to sell these pens to me, and I was trying to order about 1,000 packs of them. And the pens, it was by a Japanese company called Artline, and they have what they use on their advertising blurbers, the thickest marker pens in the world, or something along those lines. And I thought to myself, well, that's good. I'm going to be able to see those from 20 feet or 30 feet away from the back of the audience. We'll be able to tell the colours, and we'll be able to see the images that they've drawn or the words that they've written really, really clearly. So I got a pack in. I realised they work really, really well, and I wanted to buy them wholesale and get a big box of them for the Pro kit. And then the actual box for that was created it's actually designed by myself and Phill. Phill did the development net for it in a computer file, which then went over to Hong Kong. And Alan Wong was the guy who sourced the manufacture of those pen boxes for us. So a big shout out to Alan, because without that, it would never have existed as a Pro kit.
Wow. Well, I think it's a great choice, and leads us to the tail end of your 8 with number 7. So what did you put in your 7th spot?
So this was the one that I wasn't 100% sure I wanted to include, because I know that you're going to ask me about the type of routine. And really what I have ended up doing with it is like a mashup of a lot of ideas that have been published, so I can kind of reference them and talk about that a little bit without being too open. But it's the concept of PK touches. I think it's a fantastic concept. I do think that it's been overdone over the years, especially from the point of view of stage performers using chairs, let's say. There's a lot of very similar things where people jump up from chairs, you know, the old sort of shocked chair kind of gag. And the methods that I've looked into, I've tried to, obviously Banachek's original psychological touches, or psychokinetic touches, let's say. I never liked the idea of demonstrating aura cleansing. You know, it didn't fit me. And that's not to say that doesn't fit anyone else, but for me, it didn't. I knew myself enough to know that I couldn't connect with that idea. Leo Manor, widely credited for invisible touches as well. And then since then, it's quite kind of muddied. So a few years ago, there was a product out called D'Angelo's Touch. I loved it, but I also knew that it wasn't 100% original. Because of my involvement with the British Society of Mystery Entertainers the years before, which I talked about with the Secrets or Secrets events, Steve Drury actually introduced me to a routine called Shamanic Touches. And it was by, and I don't want to butcher his name, I think it was an Italian mentalist by the name of Wolf Waldbauer. I want to say Waldbauer or Bayer. I think it was Waldbauer, Wolf Waldbauer. And there was a video of him performing from years ago. And it looks to me, in terms of timing, probably about the same time that Charles Gauchi was doing Eye to Eye, those kind of performances. And he goes around and does this, he's got this parlor show and everyone's seated at a banquet. But there's only probably about 30 or 40 people there, so he's not mic'd up. And he's giving this incredible demonstration where you can clearly see that some of the movements in there are very similar to the D'Angelo Touch thing, but this predates it by a good 10 years, I would like to think, at least. So I would recommend people that are into that to look at Wolf's routine, Shamanic Touches. But then you've got more, let's say, more updated ideas. Peter Turner, he has his Midas Touch routine, which I think there's a book out, isn't it, called the PK book, the Pocket Book. Definitely recommend that if you want to get a broad overview of that sort of area of mentalism. But in terms of an actual physical gimmick thing, let's say, PK Touches tends to not really have a gimmick. But some companies have developed gimmicks for it, and one of the very best that I've seen and used is a product called Intuito by, I want to say, Master Miracles. It's a German creator, a guy called Jürgen. And it's a blindfold that achieves the same thing, and it looks great. I've used that on stage with various things, and the routine that I've developed is a mishmash, a Jive Bunny remix of all those ideas, and sprinkled with some of my others as well. And I say the word sprinkled because of something that I introduced to it, and I've not really spoken about outside of My Mind Rocks with it, but I would love to sort of share it with some of the readers here because it sounds so crazy, but it's great. My partner Nicola, she's amazing at baking. She's always baking. I'm her chief tester. That's why I always, I'm either ballooning my way or I'm at the gym looking better. But it's one of those things. I'm always trying cupcakes, cakes, whatever it is that she's baking at the time. And one day I found this little pack, and I've got to be careful because I know you told me about methods, but I'm just going to say a pack of cupcake toppings, sprinkles. I mentioned about some little sprinkles of my idea. You can get sprinkles that are black and they are very dull and they don't shine or react to any kind of lighting. And you can have them in your pocket, and there are millimeter round balls. You can literally take them out, you can throw them at people, you can flick them, you can drop them on the hands. and no one sees them. And at the start, when I was playing around with this, I didn't have the black ones. I was just getting them from like Sainsbury's. So you get like a pink one, a blue one, a yellow one, and a white one, and they would often react to the light. They'd reflect a little flash of light, and you would see this. But with the black ones, they're completely hidden, and I find that just playing around with those for a little bit of time, you'll get a load of ideas how to do a real-time PK touch that's invisible to anyone trying to watch. So I think that's all I'm going to say on that. But I hope it's giving you enough of an idea as to what I'll be doing.
Well, this is the one. Anyone who knows me knows that I could speak for hours on PK touches because I'm just a huge fan of it. But where would you normally perform PK touches then? Is this something that you've done weddings and walk around as well as stage, or do you primarily just perform it for stage?
I've had a little bit of success performing it close up at the weddings. The problem is with that kind of environment where you are strolling is that people can come up from any angle and all of a sudden you can be surrounded. You've got to be really acutely aware of any kind of angles. So if I'm going to do the full kind of routine, and the routine that I use, it uses the doll. I had a knitted doll made that just happens to look like the participant who's up on stage with me, because there's always a lady with dark hair in a black dress at a corporate event. So I just make sure that that's the person who comes up, and the little doll then looks really creepy that I've got a doll of her in my case, which makes sense when she starts to feel things that the doll's feeling. I think it came from that really ironic and comedy line about show me on the doll where you got touched. I think that's probably where the idea came from. So I think I've had better success with it on stage and in parlour, where I'm a little bit more in control of the angles and who's there behind me and who can see from that aspect. So I'm probably just going to stick with parlour on that one. You can actually buy it today from lulu.com by typing in Shamanic Touches by Wolf Waldbauer, Waldbauer. It's just a small paperback book, but it will give you the historic background of that and maybe put to bed any sort of thoughts and the timeline as to where that appeared, because I think it's important that we know who came first and things like that for stuff like that. So, yeah.
Well, that's one that I'll be picking up, so thank you for that. But it does lead us to number 8, so your final choice. What did you put in your last spot?
You mentioned it earlier. You said you owned it. It is a Q&A. And it's my Q&A project that I did called Frameworks. And I've chosen to include that because I think the older I've got, the more and wiser I've become, the more I realise that really Q&A is the absolute purest form of a mentalist act that you can get, really, in terms of that connecting with the audience, making them care about it, and performing something that is just, you know, otherworldly. It's just difficult to dismiss it as a trick. Once you start answering questions, I don't always, even though I call it a Q&A, and I talk about this in Frameworks, I often perform it with more of an audience reading. So sometimes I won't even get questions written down. I might have, you know, a fun fact, an interesting memory about you, that sort of thing. And I use that to connect with the audience, but not just me with the audience member, but all of us. So we're learning about each other through whatever you've chosen to share, which is good for me because every show's different and every show's unique because you've chosen to share this with me, and the audience yesterday chose to share that with me, and what have you. So it creates a nice, unique kind of vibe during the show. And also, I would say I would use the framework system is because, for those people that don't know, Framework started off as a project called Emergency Q&A. And it was something that I would keep in my bag for an event where I needed to use it in that emergency situation. So I planned to do different types of Q&As over the years. One of them would have been the Hull card. I learned a really nice sort of, it was called the Supper Club Act, Volta, was it Berlin Hull's Volta Club Supper Club Act or something? And it was Ciccardi, Dr. Charles Scott, and also John Riggs did a really good DVD on that. So that was one of the Q&As that I spent a bit of time with learning. But I found that with that, you have this big box that you have to bring in, and it's not always possible that I can take that box with me. So then I learned some of the Q&As that Bob Cassidy talks about, and I love his bowl Q&A that he does in his Q&A act, where people just chuck slips of questions in, he collects them, and in order for him to perform that, he would then have to have a break in that performance where he could go backstage, let's say. And the last thing that I wanted to do is have to be able to perform this and rely on, being able to meet the audience beforehand, to give out things and to collect them up and then have time to prepare it all in that moment. So the emergency Q&A was a project that I'd set myself to, if everything goes wrong and you just had to walk out on stage with some question cards and some pencils, that you could go into doing this without any kind of pre-show or preparation. And that's where that idea was born out of. It then not so very quickly, but when I started to look at this as a release that I wanted to put out, it then very quickly started to gather momentum. And it really started to take shape when I spent some time with Mark Paul. And I shared my Q&A with him, and he loved it. And he actually said to me, he says, this is not just an emergency Q&A. This is actually a great method to go and use. But I think we should spend a bit of time with it. And that's when he started throwing ideas at me. And I remember it was during lockdown. We were having 2 and 3 hour conversations about things. And I'd go away and he'd go away, and then we'd catch up again a few weeks later. And this kind of organically started to sculpt into something much bigger than just a Q&A program. And it started to build into a show, and it was a structure that people say, like with jazz mentalism and Q&As, it's very difficult to sort of structure that because you don't know what you're going to say. You don't know what questions you're going to get, and that's going to vary each time. So it's not like you can script a reveal for this. Well, I suppose you can, but, over the years, you'll get certain questions that are attributed to, one aspect of life, whether it be, marriage or money or something like that. And you can have kind of stock things that you can use and bring in. But what Mark did was sort of identify some really interesting points, and that's where these transitional points kind of came in. And for people who don't own Brainworks and don't know what it's about, it's actually a structure that you learn. And once you understand this basic structure, you then can go in and learn expanded structures and then advanced structures, and then you start creating your own. And once you understand how that kind of works, and all of a sudden you've kind of created your own mentalism show, what's peppered and littered with Q&A, but you've got these natural transition points where you go off into other bigger aspects, like a demonstration, what might be a chair test or something like that. But it kind of all flows within this same structure, and Frameworks then, it started to take a different shape. When that came out, we had 300 of them made, and I always have a very small run of products made because I don't want to have, I don't want a garage full of thousands of boxes. But at the same time, I think to myself, I'm using these products, I developed them for myself, and here's like 200, 300 of them additionally, what I'm just going to sell to people that are interested in my work. So that's how I've always kind of thought about me releasing my products, not as a big commercial project to sell to Murphy's and then to have it filter down into all the shops and everybody stock it. I just want to have it more of a little boutique thing where if you're a fan of my work, you know what I'm about, and you want to come and get something a little bit different, you can come and buy this. And that's what Frameworks was. And it's been probably one of the most successful releases I've had to date, not just in terms of sales and selling the numbers, but in terms of the amount of engagement from the people that have bought it. And I always judge the success of a release for me, not on whether it's sold out or not, whether people are emailing me in 6 months' time and saying, I've lost it and can I buy another one? Or it's got damaged on the sand or something like that. I've had all sorts of questions over the years where people have wanted to get replacements of things because they use them. And I think often you can release something, or people say if you want to have something what people don't look at or even remember, put it in a book. And that's really true, because some of my favorite things that I've ever created were in the Black Project that no one ever talks about. And whereas frameworks, everybody who bought it was talking about it, and they were excited to share. And I know you did this, Jamie. You shared some really invaluable, great tips on frameworks on the owners group, which then inspired others to go and play around with it and then come back and share those tips. And for me, that's when I knew it was a successful product, when it created that sort of network of people that were working together with this common goal of using frameworks. And since then, I learned that Jan Becker, one of Germany's biggest mentalists, he's currently got a show every night that he performs it in Berlin, and he just does frameworks, his own version of it. He shared that with us at My Mind Rocks. It was just mind-blowing to see. I almost got a little bit emotional, really, to actually see someone taking that, what's had so much blood, sweat and tears go into, and use it to connect with his audiences and to share his message and talk about what he does and whatnot. So yeah, frameworks for me would be the final thing that I would take. And it's not really taking a physical prop. You're taking a bunch of cards and some pencils, but it's the ideas behind it and inside that release that enable you to create a really nice, strong, powerful moment that will connect your audience together and enable you to perform a mentalism show. So that's my last one.
Well, it's a great choice. I would have been shocked if it wasn't in there, to be honest, because like you say, I purchased this when you first put it out. And I remember seeing the group, and everyone was so invested in it from the off. And the reason I think that yours stands up, and again, we've spoken about Q&A on the podcast before. We've had it selected not a load of times, but a decent amount of times. And I think the problem is with Q&A is that there are a lot of methods for it, but there is no structure to those methods generally. So it's jazz mentalism by and large, which is absolutely fine. But if you don't have the structure and the idea, well, I've got all of these methods now, but what on earth do I do with it? And that's what I loved about frameworks, was not only is it a series of frameworks and structures, but there's some really clever methods and integrations of methods that you will already know, and you've combined all of that into this set of structures which are easy to follow, easy to master, so much fun to practice, I might just add. Normally you would never say Q&A is a fun thing to practice, but it's great.
It's very difficult to practice it, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got a tangible structure to work on, which is great fun. Like you say, but at the same time, you'll find that everything that you do in it, you already know how to do. The basic moves, but put together in a sequence that if you follow that sequence, oh my God, you're suddenly 3 ahead, or you've got access to a load of pieces of information that no one knows about, and now you've got all the time in the world to go back to. And really, it was an experiment in seeing how far you can get ahead. In terms of being prepared for the reveals, having all this information available to you. And I think one of the reasons why it's been so successful is because of the community. And I think that going forward, I'm going to compile all those ideas, yours included, and try and get as much of it and make sense of it and put it into an actual physical book that can be sold, because I think that'll be really beneficial to people just getting into it and others that might have missed out on it.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd be a consumer of that straight away. I'd love to have that to reference back to, because there's so much information that was there to begin with, and now with everyone's input, it's just massive.
It really is. I mean, like the way I do it now, I start off, and I think you did that. I can say this, it'll mean nothing to anyone else, but it'll mean something to Jamie. But you did something with question 0. Reveal 0. And that inspired me to go off and look at how many ways I can do the same thing, eliminate that idea of using that. And I came up with something that I've used since, and it is so bold. And every time I do it, I laugh inside my head that I've just got away with that and no one's seen it and they don't know that I'm going to come back to it in a minute. So one, thank you for that, because you've inadvertently influenced it. But as a result, when I look back at the basic framework from the booklet, the way I do it now is completely unrecognizable from that. So it's important that the people went on the journey though, so they could understand where it was at the start. All right, I understand what you're trying to do there, and now it's come this, and now you're doing this. What am I going to do with it? And I think it's almost like that rite of passage. We've all got our drawers full of dusty mentalism and magic props that we bought. We've not wasted the money on it. We might not use it, but we've learned something from it. We've learned it's not for us, but we've learned why that's not for us, because we prefer a method that's more this. You're always going to learn from those kind of failures, whether people see it or not. And I think we learned the most from our failures. And Frameworks was essentially a giant the steamroll of things that had failed, and I wanted to put something together that was just a little bit, I could rely on it no matter what. And that's, I'm very, 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 very proud of that.
Well, I say to people this all the time, but do go check it out. If you have always wanted to do Q&A, if you've always wanted to look into it, I think it's one of the most approachable versions of the Q&A that you'll ever come across, and it really is a set of structures and systems which will help you ease into it and expand, which I think is just as important. The idea that you can start with a seed, be comfortable with that, and then just allow it to manifest and grow over time. But Looch, you did just mention your dusty drawer. Now, on our island, we don't have a dusty drawer, but we do have a big sand pit that you get to chuck something inside for your banishment. So what did you banish in your island?
Oof. I thought about this one for a while, and I was really, I had to sort of bounce back and forth on it. But I decided to go for it. It might be a little bit controversial. But maybe not, I don't know. So if I could banish one thing from the magic community, it would be the obsession with shortcuts. And no, I don't mean iOS shortcuts. I know there's plenty of performers that have a phone that can turn it into a Pete device and make them some toast. I'm talking about the mindset of shortcutting your way through magic and mentalism. The belief that you can skip the foundations, buy your way into being a great performer. And you see a lot of this in mentalism, especially kind of stockpiling gimmicks, secret tech, buying everything that's new, hoping that the next purchase is going to finally make them. It's like chasing that holy grail. This next purchase is going to make me, a big star, or it's going to create that thing that I want. And a lot of people just, it doesn't work like that. So mentalism really for me is not about what's in your pockets. It's about what's inside your head. The real tools of the trade are invisible. Psychological techniques, language, timing, the ability to read a room and adapt in real time. And unfortunately, those things aren't for sale. So you develop them through experience, reflection, practice, not really from the product description on a magic site. So I think 95% of what strong mentalists learn and use actually just lives upstairs. The remaining 5% is just there to help translate what's already been built through skill and experience, really. I think if you reverse that and you're carrying 95% of what you've learned in your pockets, you're not really a performer, you're just a consumer of magic, really. So that idea of trying to shortcut everything, I suppose there's a little bit of sense of entitlement with generations coming through, which is where I knew I was going to be touching on something that might be controversial. And I'm not trying to be that gatekeeper role. I'm trying to make sure the gate survives and it's still stood up there in 10 years' time, because there's that sense of entitlement from people like, my mentors, people that I looked up to and spent time with growing up learning mentalism, they just didn't give it me on a plate. I'd have to go and earn my chops and get experience and fail. And that's really, I mentioned about learning more from failures. That's where you really sort of learn what works for you and who you are as a mentalist that way, by taking your time. So I would like to slow down. I'd like everyone to slow down a little bit. We have got more methods and more tricks right now than we'll ever need in a million lifetimes. Slow down, look at and find yourself and find what works for you and take your time doing it. It's a lifelong process. It's not a race to the top, because if you invariably cut through people and get to that top, you'll have to remember them on the way down. I think that's as sort of placid as I can say it. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think it's a really interesting thing to think about, isn't it? Because nowadays we have these tropes in our industry, like pack small plays big, everyday carry, whereas, you know, when I mean, Andy Nyman touched on this when we spoke about props and how magicians should still be magical and we should have these magical things, but in a modern age we're so scared and concerned about people calling them out and saying, what is that? Really, we shouldn't be concerned about that. But what I think's so interesting is one place that I find really inspirational is the Magic Circle in London, and on the walls is just hundreds of years of history, and those people who were, you know, the people who paved the way for us, they were not concerned about it being an everyday carry. They had elephants and cages and all of these grand things, you know. They had these beautiful props. They were never concerned about making it easy. It's so interesting how over the years we've changed into this as quick and easy as we can do it without really putting the time and the effort in. But I wonder if that comes down to fear. I wonder if a lot of performers are scared to take the leap, to do a show, to hire a theatre, to approach a restaurant to do some work. I wonder if it just comes from a place of worry and not really understanding how to get into things.
It's difficult, isn't it, really, because everyone's got their own sort of goals and what they want to, sort of expectations of what they want to achieve. It's more prevalent now than what it was 10 years ago. And I did an event last year. I was hosting an event for, it was a council, a conference event, talking about the sort of, it was like an economic thing, but they'd hired a specific speaker to come in and talk about certain things. And he was from the University of Liverpool, and he chose to talk about attention span. And he said, you know, in this day and age, the attention span is lower than ever. And I think his relationship with the university was that he was in charge of the relationship between the students and the academic board. So that's that whole thing, the way that they got on, that was his thing. And he talks about how the average attention span now is like literally 3 to 4 seconds because of, you know, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, all these short range content, what's like under a minute. And when people look at this scroll, and you know, I find myself doing it, I'm scrolling through things and I'm literally not even giving it a second to register. No, not interested. I'm making that snap judgment, which when you look at people like Malcolm Gladwell, he wrote that book Blink years ago, and he talks about how there are people out there, experts in the field, that because they've got such a wide range of experience and skills, that they are in that position. Sometimes they just know. They can't explain why, but they're just in a snap judgment with all that years of experience working in a specific field. They know whether something's this or that. And Malcolm gives examples of forgeries within the art world. And he talks about these two guys that were experts in sculpture, of marble sculpture from like the Renaissance period and Roman period and things like that. And they had this group that had spent thousands of pounds trying to take samples of this marble to work out whether it was a forgery. And this one guy walked in, and within 10 seconds, he said, yeah, it's a fake. And he said, well, how the hell do you know that? And he couldn't put it into words at the time. And he said, I just know that it's a fake. And then it turns out it was. And they tried to analyze how he knew that it was. And I think that's kind of like with magic, the longer you spend in it, you are instinctively going to know what's going to work for an audience, work for you. And you can't shortcut those kind of things. It's things that you have to invest yourself in, and time, money, and sort of experience to get it. So it's really vital that we're not trying to shortcut your way to the top, because you're going to get found out at some point, and then that's when it's all going to come crashing down, unfortunately. So yeah, that's what I'd like to banish: shortcuts in terms of the mindset of magicians and mentalists.
Well, Apple shortcuts are still safe, but all other shortcuts are buried on your island. And that brings us to your book. So what did you put in your book position?
Right, so this is the one that I took a little liberty with. The reason being, it's actually a series of books, but they are that small. They are essentially little pamphletty manuals that come together. They form a really nice book. And it's not something that I've heard many people talk about. And for me, I've got so much practical advice. There's no tricks in the book. It is the Professional Mentalists series of manuals released by Richard Osterland. And he has so far created 4 of them. And it is the Professional Mentalist Field Manual, the Professional Mentalist Officers Manual, the Professional Mentalist Intelligence Manual, and finally the Professional Mentalist Survival Manual. Together, they will be about the size of, these kind of modern classics in Magic. So something like a Tarbell, an individual issue, one sort of book would be the equivalent of these 4 manuals. They have got so much practical advice from Richard, who has had a 30, 40 year career being a professional mentalist all over the world. He talks about anything from, connecting with an audience or the stage layout, why you should do it this way and not that way, what you should wear, why you should never drink dark coloured liquids and always stick to clear liquids. Just little tiny things, nuggets of information that you wish someone had pulled you to one side when you were getting started and just whispered in your ear. So when I read through those books, I hear Richard speaking it to me in his voice, in that Kentucky voice. And I find that really relaxing. So yes, my book would be The Professional Mentalist Manuals by Richard Osterland.
So people know that Devil's Advocate comes out when there's a series of books. However, I discovered quite a few podcasts ago that's quite mean. So we go at it from a different angle now. So if you were to recommend one of these for our listeners to start with, the first one for them to go to, which one would you recommend them to go to?
The green one. But in terms of the covers, they all look like camouflage. And there's one of them that's green, then it's grey, then red, and then finally like an orange colour. So it'd be the field manual will be the first one. And I think you can usually tell by the order of them by looking at the front cover. There is a 4-digit number, and that's a date. And it's the dates that they were published, I think. So if you look at those dates, the sequence that they were released. The first one, because it was the start of the project, it's all those things that have been rattling around in his head for years that he wanted to get out. And then I think as we've got further into the series, it's more about, let me sit and think about what else I can put in what I've not already mentioned. So definitely the first one would be the one that I would tell you to pick up and read.
Okay, there you go. So we've not restricted Looch to just taking one, but he has recommended one. So all of those can go with you. And it does lead us to the item. So what did you put in your item position?
So this is the item that I can take that's not magic related, but I do use it for some kind of performance. Is it really cliche for me just to say my phone?
If that's what you want, then that's fine. But do let us know why specifically your phone.
I'm always on it. I'm always on it. I'm addicted to it. And I run the business, the businesses that I do, I run that through it. So I'm always on my phone. In terms of performances, I think the older I've got, the less I've become reliant on that. And we only have to look at things like what's happening in the Magic community at the moment with like apps that have been up and running for years. And all of a sudden they're now not running, and it's causing like problems with the community, and people are sort of name calling and things like it. I try to stay out of it, but I look at it and I think to myself, when you become too reliant on technology and too reliant on certain things, what happens when they get pulled away from you? How are you going to sort of react to that and develop and change and pivot from? So maybe not my phone, and we're saying it's an item that I want to take that I can still use for performances. So realistically, then I'm probably going to be looking at things like my case. I spent a long time choosing the case that I take to my stage shows. I wanted a case that would fit in on brand with me and sort of match without walking and looking like I'm carrying an antique doctor's case from the 1800s. So it's a modern case by a company called Zarges, Zarges. It cost a fortune. It cost about 400 quid. But it's the perfect size to fit everything in for my show. And not only that, the case itself, the depth of the case and things built into that case enable me to achieve things that I can't do without it usually. So it's my hidden assistant, it's my hidden helper that I rely on whenever I'm doing a parlor show or a stage show. So I'm going to say my Zargis aluminium composite briefcase, to be very specific, and a little bit weird as well.
Well, you are the first guest that we've had who has talked themselves out of one of the selections. That was a real challenge. We started with the iPhone, then you realised maybe something might go wrong, and then we were on the case.
Yeah, the truth is, as I was reading through and preparing for it, I got to the books, I got to what I wanted to banish, and I thought I got everything, and I completely forgotten about that last item. But naturally, my thoughts went to the phone because I sometimes use it. But then just with a few minutes of changing, and you've got to be like this in Magic. You've got to be open to change, I think. You can't always think you know everything is right. Listen to the people around you, adapt based on what they think and what they genuinely care for you anyway. So I wanted to talk to myself. Well, I did talk myself out of it because I knew that case means a lot to me. When I'm on stage, it's like a safe place. It sounds crazy, but there are things that I can do with that. Well, I'm not going to go into that enable me to do things and make things much easier for me if it's there as opposed to when it's not there. So, yes, I'm happy with my choice.
And I wonder how many people are now Googling what that looks like just to see what it looks like.
They won't. They'll look at it and they'll go, "Oh, it's just a briefcase." Yeah, it is. But it's I've changed a few things inside it with the layout and what have you, and that's just part of my journey as being a mentalist. It's not everything as a mentalist. If you're a creator, not everything will come out to everyone else. Do you know what I mean? It's just one of my little private deep dives, I suppose, my little rabbit holes that I've gone into.
Well, it's a great list. We started with Mark Deck, a real die, fourth dimensional telepathy with school days routine. We've got the Ritual Quartet, the lineup, PK touches, Q&A frameworks. Your banishment was the obsession with shortcuts. Your book was the Professional Mentalist series of manuals by Richard Osselin. And your item is the bag, which I cannot remember the name that you called it, but the really fancy briefcase.
That's it. I'm happy with that selection. Yes.
Yeah, that's a great selection. There's some really lovely routines there. We've got some really nice close-up pieces, some big statement pieces like Q&A there as well. So yeah, I think that's a really amazing mentalist list there. I think there's an entire lifetime's work of exploration right there, I would say.
I think so. I think you're right. It's certainly my lifetimes anyway.
Well, if anyone wants to find out more about you, Looch, where they can find out about frameworks and the lineup, etc., where can they go to?
So I have two websites. One of them is readmymind.co.uk. That is essentially my online store where I sell my products. And I release probably about 2 products per year. So it's drip fed products that I use in my own shows, my own performances that I've had made, that I want to share with the community as opposed to it being designed to sell. But then there is also another website which I definitely recommend you check out, and that is www.mymind.rocks. And that is a professional mentalism community. That doesn't mean that you have to be professional. It's just that everyone, you don't have to be a professional, but everyone is professional on there and treats everyone with respect. Our motto is no haters, just creators, and it's a monthly subscription. And each month we have special guests from all over the world. I teach tricks from my content. So I'm either out at a show, I'm on stage, I'm doing something, then I'll do a deep dive explaining it, how it works. We have a forum. You get 20% off all my products at Read My Mind. And it's just a really nice little place to be. We've got a few hundred members now from around the world. And we get together each week, do live sessions, live jams. But one of the biggest draws these days is our special guests. So, for example, in the last 3 months, we've had Scott Creasy do a lecture for us. We had Luke Jamay come on and do a Q&A. We actually rescheduled that as well because we're going to do another session with Luke as a result of that. And we've had Colin Cloud over in Vegas talking about how to write a mentalism show, which was 2.5 hours of him talking us through the exact steps that he goes through when he writes a new Mentalism show. It was packed full of golden nuggets. It was great. So one of the questions that I guess get asked is that if I joined, are you able to watch all the content? I think there was a misconception that people just, if you don't turn up for the lives, you don't get a chance to see it. Everything's recorded. So right now we've got about 300 unique pieces of content on there. And you get to see the replays. So the Colin, the Luke, all the others, and we've had pretty much every name you can think of in Mentalism be a guest. So if you haven't seen them yet, you will see them by the end of the year. It's great. It's probably the best thing that I've ever done in Mentalism. It was a pivot that I decided to take up during COVID when I couldn't perform. Because of my background in teaching, I'm so glad that I did and trusted myself, or my instincts, let's say, because it's turned out into something that was missing in Mentalism, I think, which is a sense of community and people wanting others to do well. So yeah, mymind.rocks. And that's it.
Yeah, it's a great platform. It's one of the ones as well, when you hear people talking about streaming platforms, My Mind Rocks is always on that list of the one that people really enjoy. There's some really amazing content. So yeah, please do go check it out because it's a phenomenal resource. And thank you so much, Looch, for giving up your time.
No, thank you for yours, mate. I'm really appreciative of people giving up their time. So you've given up your same amount of time as well. So thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it. And I hope all the listeners enjoy it too.
And thank you all for listening, of course. Now, if you would like to be a part of one of these, we do have something called Stranded with a Stranger, where you can send in your list to us. So send it to sales@alakazam.co.uk. Include a little bio about you, and of course, your 8 tricks, 1 banishment, 1 book, and 1 non-magic item. And of course, tell us why you like those tricks as well. Otherwise, it's just a very, very short podcast. And then send those in and we can get one of these recorded for you. Thank you very much. Do go check out Looch's My Mind Rocks and his socials as well. He's always posting some great stuff. And of course, I'm going to be going through his list and grabbing out some of those items now before this goes to air and everyone buys it and it all goes out of stock, which is what happens. So thank you all. Have a great week and we'll see you next week with another episode of Desert Island Tricks. Goodbye.
Hello guys, I'm here to talk to you about Alakazam Unlimited. This is the best streaming platform in the world, I'm telling you now. With Alakazam Unlimited, you get access to over 150 magic routines. This is video performances and explanations. We have card magic, coin magic, kids magic, rope magic, mentalism, stage, parlor, impromptu. We've got you covered. All of this for the low price of just £4.99 a month. And you can cancel at any time. Perfect if you've got commitment issues. Yes, I'm talking to you. Guys, you are going to absolutely love it. If you haven't joined the platform already, what the heck are you doing? Alakazam Unlimited is a streaming platform that you need to be a part of. Not only that, there is also exclusive content only available on the platform. Check it out now, alakazam.co.uk. Cheers.